Welcome to Ask the Grant Writing Experts. I'm Dr. Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of your library of NIH grant submission courses. I have over 35 years of experience at NIH as an applicant and intramural researcher, a staff writer, and now a full-time NIH grant mentor. I've helped clients land over $500 million in federal funding, and I'm here to answer your NIH grant writing questions. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. So if you're attending live, just a reminder that you are attending in listen-only mode. So that means that you can't speak up, but you can certainly start typing questions in the Q&A box. So, we're both here to answer questions throughout this session. So start loading up the Q&A box. If you have something that you want to share pertaining to the topic we're discussing and you just want to make a comment, feel free to put that in the comment box as well. If you're watching this as a recording, and I know more and more of you are watching this as a recording, both within our course dashboard and on our open YouTube channel, just a disclaimer that everything we say today, which is June 26, 2024, is true to the best of our knowledge today. But things move quickly in the world of grant writing, and particularly NIH grant writing. So please always double check the facts before you take anything we're saying as gospel at some future date. What you should be viewing in our NIH library right now. I know that a lot of you, just looking at the names of people in attendance here, a lot of you are attending our live stream boot camp. So probably I would imagine that it would be helpful for some of you to look at I know it's a data dump of information, these boot camps. So it probably would be helpful to look at the recordings, either of the live stream boot camps, which have the Q&A in them, or the content is also set up as a pre-recorded virtual course within our learning management system, where the lessons are broken down into short, easy to digest information with interactivity. There's interactive checklists. You can download course supplements that have exercises in them and additional samples, etc. So I would encourage you primarily to be looking at Chapter 1 preparation and Chapter 2 specific aims, as many of you are prepping to write for the October and November deadlines. So this week, I'm delighted to have as our guest Veronika Redmann, who is a wonderful SBIR, STTR grant writer, among many other things. We went to the same academic medical center. We're both alumni of Mount Sinai Medical School. So welcome, Veronika.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Meg. So I spent over a decade doing bench science, research scientist, grad student, postdocs, all of those. And then about 8 years, I switched to exclusively working in the area of SBIR, STTR grants with academic faculty, founders, industry, VCs, everybody in that ecosystem of startups. My own scientific background is in the area of infectious disease. So I did my PhD in biomedical sciences, but was in a microbiology department. So I'm still excited when I get to see grants that are around infectious disease and immunology, including the neighboring corner of cancer immunology. But I also enjoy, by having that training that was across biomedical sciences, the ability to dive into anything and nerd on out in anyone's science. So for this reason, with my training scientifically, it comes very naturally to sit in people's grants and be able to help them critique if they have enough preliminary data, if they've communicated it well enough, how to respond to reviewers' critiques. And then in the last 8 years, what I've taken on new in terms of grant writing outside of grad school and postdocing is being able to write about the business side of science. So this particular grant program, which I'm going to share a little bit more about, is a decades-old program across many federal agencies. So we have the ones with the black box host exclusively with the SBIR program, which I will define that acronym for you in just a second. And then the ones that have both a black and a red line also support an STTR program, which is more aimed around university and university faculty. So I personally, because of my life science background, work in NSF and Department of Health and Human Services that NIH is under. Just to kind of give you an idea of the scope of the program itself, we have a little pie chart on the side, and this program is divided into both grant-based opportunities and contract-based opportunities. And as you can imagine, DoD is the largest source of this federal program, but also, and in that regard, a contract-based opportunity for founders and startup companies. And the way that it works is that these agencies are congressionally mandated to spend a certain percentage on this program. And just to give you a little bit more of an idea of what we're looking at, SBIR is defined as Small Business Innovation Research, and STTR is defined as Small Business Technology Transfer Program. So broadly, the goal of this program, this decades-old program, is to try and bring out technology from universities or from industry, spin out new startups, new ways of positively impacting the American public, and trying to conserve STEM brain power here in the US and support domestic R&D work. So what I'll focus on talking about today, and also trying to take questions around, is how the SBIR STTR programs work underneath NIH and NSF. So both of these agencies are relevant, particularly for people writing life sciences for NIH. So NIH itself has basically 3 deadlines a year that stay the same. And the starting step for anyone who's thinking about, they invented some new PCR assay, or there's some new drug that has been synthesized they think now has a possibility to address this new cancer type there's no standard for, is to start with just a basic specific aims page, and then go online and find a program officer for a specific NIH institute, or sometimes they have just a generic email for the institute as a whole for their SBIR program, and get some feedback from a program officer about whether you are a good fit for that, or whether the research that you want to do is a good fit for that opportunity. And they'll give you some direction if they think that it might fit somewhere else. So that's kind of a preliminary recommended step before starting to think about applying for the, preparing the application as a whole for the deadline. National Science Foundation for SBIR and STTR functions a little bit different. They also have several deadlines throughout the year, but their first step actually is what's called a project pitch. It's about 1.5 pages. It's roughly similar to a specific aims page. It outlines the innovation of the project, the technical merit, or what is exciting about what you're trying to do, the company and team that you have, and then the actual scope of the work that you would like to do. And then if your pitch is accepted, then you have a couple of cycles roughly to submit a full proposal for funding. So how the program roughly works is across agencies, the amount of time you can do for what's called a phase 1 project varies, but usually it's 6 to 12 months of work. And also the budget amount for different agencies varies, but roughly for NSF and NIH, we're looking at about $300,000. Some NIH institutes and centers go a little bit higher above that amount. And then the traditional pathway is to finish your phase 1 and then try and apply for a renewal for what's termed phase 2 work for the same project, in which you're going for another $1 to $2 million for additional work beyond that. What's really important to realize about this program is that even for an STTR, that the applicant is always a small business. So you actually have to form a company to apply for these. So if you happen to be a faculty that, like I talked about, has invented something or has worked and collaborated with someone else, and you see clinical potential in something that you're building, you would actually have to form a company, and your company would be applying for the SBIR STTR program. In addition to the traditional phase 1, phase 2 pathway that's available at both NIH and NSF, there's now a fast track at both of those as well. And that's in which you would write a grant application that lays out both phase 1 and phase 2 work at the same time. So basically several years of work. And in one peer review step, you, in a sense, would receive good scoring for continuing through all of those phases, in a sense. So there would be a check-in point with the program officer that is assigned to you when you're completing the phase 1, but in a sense, you don't have to go through peer review twice as you would if you were doing phase 1, then phase 2. NIH also offers what's called a direct to phase 2. And in a sense, you've created so much preliminary data about this product or this invention or technology that you want to commercialize that you jump the phase 1, that you've essentially completed all of that work and you can go straight to direct to phase 2. What's great about that is it's a bigger pot of money, but as you can imagine, it's also a bigger hurdle of showing how much you have done so far in de-risking your technology to actually take it to the market or take it to the patient. What I go about in my blog talking about, but I will touch on for just a little bit here, is that one of the key aspects of the SBIR STTR program are there's some very specific requirements about who can serve as a PI for these grants, and also how the work is divvied up in terms of what work is performed by the company itself, even if the company is one individual, and then what work can be performed as externally by a subaward, subcontracted to somebody, or consultant, that kind of regard. So if you want the real in-depth discussion of that, take a look at the blog that Megan's going to be sharing. But broadly, as I go through it, the phase one, so that first 6 to 12 months of work, the max that you can contract out to a university or to a CRO or to an engineering firm to help you create a device is 33% of the overall budget. When you get to the phase 2 level, then you have as much as 50% that you could contract out. And remember again that these grants are awarded to the small business, not to the university. That you have to take that into regard, particularly if you're a faculty at a university and you're thinking about the separation of your research lab and the company itself. On the other side of the budget, and we'll talk about what other requiring components there are to an STTR, but in terms of the budget split, this is around now a minimum instead of a maximum. So 40% minimum in-house work performed by the company, and then a minimum of 30% with a partnering research institute. So again, in an STTR, the grant is awarded to the small business, but then a minimum of 30% of that grant award would then be subawarded to a nonprofit institution like a university, if you wanted to use, or a federal lab. In terms of PI, talking a little bit about this. So this is a good one to talk about with faculty who are thinking about applying for STTRs. The reason for this is because across the program, the PI for an SBIR STTR, with the exception of an NIH STTR, we'll talk about this, has to be primarily employed 51% with the small business. So if you say, I'm just going to work down my hours and just ask if I can still be part-time with my university, that doesn't actually work to meet the requirements unless you fully go to 51% at your company. Another way sometimes professors get around this is they will line up the grant project period of their SBIR STTR with when they're on sabbatical. So the terms are a little bit different employment-wise. NIH does offer the option, and this can be a real advantage to some companies, in that an additional option for a PI beyond being primarily employed with the small business is that a faculty could serve as an STTR PI as long as they're affiliated and holding office with the small business. So this is a way that the faculty, particularly a founding faculty to the technology or company, if they don't want to leave their faculty position, but they still want to be involved in the work that's being performed to bring their product that they're working on closer to market. All right, so I am going to go ahead and make room for questions.
Okay. I think we do have a question, but it's not related to this, but I have a bunch of questions for you. So the question is, does a resubmission of a scored grant automatically go to the same study section where it's originally reviewed? And actually, this could be relevant for you. So what is I know what the answer is for KR and other series. What's the answer for SBIR?
Yeah, I'd say like 99.9% of the time it's going the same place. The caveat to that to remember though is it doesn't necessarily mean you have the same reviewers though. Yeah, so you may, yeah, it could happen, but it's very possible that even though it's a resubmission, they actually are going to be looking at it with completely fresh eyes.
Yeah. So certainly in the R series at NIH, that's the case too. Technically, you're allowed to choose a different study section on a resubmission, but it's generally frowned upon. You know, the new receiving study section kind of scratches their head and wonder like, what was your issue with the other the other study section. So if you get an A0 and you feel like I really don't want to go back to the same study section, it might make sense to completely kind of retool it and put it in as an A0 to a new study section rather than putting it in as a resubmission and requesting a different study section, which is a bad look. So I wouldn't do that. But while and I agree with you that the caveat is that even if you're going into the same study section, it doesn't mean, even if you resubmit quickly, it doesn't mean that you're going to get the same reviewers for a number of reasons. One of which is that every year some percentage of your reviewers rotate off because they're invited to serve for 12 sessions. And those 12 sessions could be consecutive, which would be 3 times a year over 4 years, or non-consecutive. They're allowed to sit out 1 a year. So it could be 2 times a year over 6 years. So not only are there a certain percentage of reviewers rotating off, this is for standing study sections at the Center for Scientific Review, but there are sometimes reviewers sit out a session. They're allowed to sit out 1 per year maximum. So unfortunately, that means that you don't have even if you resubmit quickly, if you got a great score and you resubmit quickly, you don't have a lot of control over whether or not you're going to get the same reviewers, even if you want them, so.
Yeah.
But while we're on the topic, actually, among my questions for you had to do with, particularly for NIH, where are these reviewed and what is the time to award? What does the review session look like? I'm wondering how it is the same and different from the R series at NIH.
Yeah, so this is a great question. I actually will just share my screen because this is the easiest way to just talk about it. So currently there's not an active solicitation for SBIR, STTR, and just to let people know, it's across Department of Health and Human Services, everything underneath NIH. So it's all the way across. And then if we're looking at the past expired solicitation, but within the next couple weeks, they'll be releasing the new one for this year. Here's the 3 deadlines per year, the September 5th, January 5th, and April 5th. And the way that it works is, as an example for September, by the fall in November, you're under review. And then the advisory council makes a decision on funding by January, and then your earliest funding date is April, as an example. So just going into essentially what is the next cycle. So September 5th, this fall, is our next deadline. The other part to remember about NIH funding is, while this is your earliest start date, I have a lot of clients that if they sit on the fence in terms of scoring, can be an extra 3 months. Can be a lot of extra time and waiting, trying to decide whether they should go in and resubmit and try and get a better score, or to sit it out. So that is a little tricky about timing. And I will say, since I talk about both NIH and NSF SBIR program, NSF is typically faster. You can typically get your money in 6 months after the deadline passed. So they're a little faster releasing money than NIH if you're a technology that straddles both of those agencies in terms of possible funding.
So, and this is actually faster than the R series. And I'm curious about I kind of looked at that. I was like, oh, the deadlines are a month before the R01 deadlines, except for the April 5th one, which is like, what was it, May 5th? I don't know. But,
yeah.
Who knows? But but this is faster. So what are they looking for in review? What are some of the key things to think about when writing the application?
Yeah. So this is a good one, especially when trying to think about how you approach R01s, KO, like that kind of stuff. How is this different? So the purpose of the funding mechanism is to try and commercialize technologies. So the first emphasis is around your technical area itself. So how novel is what you're doing? And then the other side of what's being reviewed is, does it have a commercial potential at all? Is there actually a market for this product, or is it just a problem you're solving for yourself that you see every day, right? Whether it's in research or in the clinic. So they're evaluating 2 sides of the card here. When you're at the phase 1 level, your ability to convey the commercial potential of your problem you're solving is very short, maybe about a paragraph. When you try and go back for more money, whether NSF or NIH, then you have a 12-page commercialization plan that goes alongside your research strategy, project description, different names for same technical kind of document of explaining the project and the problem. So they are the area of overlap, if I'm comparing it to other academic grants, is they're still evaluating you for doing state-of-the-art science. Are you doing the best quality, cutting-edge research that you can do? Do your facilities, does your team convey that in terms of experience? But as you can imagine, there's a slight edge on it that now they're also asking, do you have facilities? Do you have partners for commercializing it? So those can come in terms of your personnel. If you have other people on your team with startup experience that have commercialized other products or have regulatory experience or manufacturing experience. And then also whether a startup has made any effort to move out of an academic environment or out of its original setting where that technology was invented or found, whatever. So moving out of there and either occupying its own office or lab space as a business or being part of an accelerator, that also is part of the judging process. How much has the physical movement of the company to a different environment happened, or whether they're still located in an academic lab.
And at NIH, are these done at the Center for Scientific Review in their own study sections?
Yeah, so this is really interesting because I've been in a call with a program officer about this where a client wanted to know about this. So they're not necessarily SBIR panels, and they aren't necessarily specific to the institutes. Some institutes share panels in this topic area of their commercializing devices or whatever. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. All right. So, and then another question I have is, actually I have two more questions if we have time for it. One of them is, and actually let me pause because I see I'm like hogging up the time, but somebody here has a question. Although not required for an R21, some data showing ability to obtain and analyze placentas and documenting placental infection would help demonstrate feasibility of proposed approaches. How answering such a comment from the reviewer if we cannot provide preliminary data? Okay, so a reviewer has commented on an R21, although not required for an R21. Some data showing ability to obtain and analyze placentas and documenting placental infection would help demonstrate feasibility of the proposed approaches. So I guess my question is, why can't you provide that preliminary data on a resubmission? Because that's the obvious thing to do, is to gather that preliminary data and then resubmit with that preliminary data. Because I don't know the nature of your project, but it seems to me that that's a pretty significant thing. Usually if you submit any part of the project, even on an R21, technically preliminary data are not required, but they really are. So I guess my question would be, why can't you provide those preliminary data? And if you really can't, I would have a conversation with the program officer about potentially how to address this issue. But I would think that trying to provide it on a resubmission is the thing to do.
Yeah, I'll comment a little bit on preliminary data because I teach workshops about NSF SBIR, where we talk about what is preliminary data, what are they expecting. And just to add in a good comparison point is that NIH is more risk averse for the SBIR STTR program. They want to see a ton of preliminary data. And SF is the other way. They want to invest in things in this program that are very high risk that NIH would not want to fund. So they're willing to go with a lower level of preliminary data if you're really doing something outside of the box. Also, that means their definition of the word innovation is very high and stringent, and NIH is a little bit lower because they're looking to want to solve this problem for that NIH Institute or Center. But in terms of preliminary data, sometimes it's hard to find money to generate preliminary data for startups or founders, right? So the goal is you could get as far as you can get with academic grants if it's coming out of an academic environment, but there may come a point where it is harder to find the money to generate the preliminary data that you wish you had. And when that is the case, I talk about how sometimes there is publicly available data or published data on your competitors. So if you're trying to design a similar, let's say, medical device or similar pharmaceutical, you can leverage some of the published data or peer-reviewed data by your competitors. Sometimes companies, again, competitive landscape, may have stuff on the company websites themselves about how their products function or perform. You may be able to leverage some of that. Another area is that sometimes preliminary data for an SBIR STTR is around your customers themselves. So something called customer discovery, where you go out and validate for yourself that your view of the problem is correct. So an example would be, we want to solve this problem for GI patients. So part of our preliminary data for our NIH or NSF application was we interviewed 10 patients, we interviewed 10 nurses, and then we interviewed like 10 social workers that are all around this problem that we're trying to solve, to confirm that 100% of them say that if we had a product that achieved these tasks, that it would cut off a day in the clinical workflow or something for the team that's managing that process. So sometimes there are other ways that we as scientists or clinicians don't think about preliminary data that can still be helpful to how you are presenting a problem for an SBIR STTR grant.
That's really interesting. I get a lot of questions about preliminary data, so maybe we'll have you come back and talk about that. Do you, and I think you work also outside of SBIR, STTR okay. Yeah, so we should probably have a conversation about that because I love it. I get a lot of questions about what are preliminary data?
Yes.
Can it be published? Can they be other people's? Can it be unpublished? Do I, like all kinds of questions about that. So this is a good topic. So, and I'm going to not let you go just quite yet, because I also wanted to ask you, just thinking about the people who are on this call right now, if somebody is listening to this presentation and they're thinking, I have an idea for something that I might want to submit an application for. How do they get started if they're an academic researcher? They have something where they're thinking, strategizing about, like, down the road, I think I might want to do this. Who do I talk to, both at my university or academic medical center and at one of these federal agencies? So how does it get started?
Yes. Okay. So one of the easiest ways to get started, we're very fortunate for NIH that they actually offer example funded applications for SBIR STTR. Other agencies do not. This is very, very lucky. NSF does not offer these. So you can actually go and look what would be inside of these applications, all the components, how it's explained. They black out some of the proprietary information. In terms of getting started, that's a great step, just to see what those applications look like, what's involved in preparing for them. In terms of actually having something and starting the business side of being ready as a company, you potentially might want to talk to an Office of Technology Management or Technology Transfer Office at your university, just to make them aware of the possibility of what you might be wanting to commercialize. So they may offer resources on their own to help you get started with SBIR STTR. Some universities actually will offer some funds to help work with a grant writer or help a departmental grant writer be part of it a little bit. The trick, though, is that the grant isn't submitted by the university, it's submitted by the small business. So there is a level of separation there, so that your resources will not get you likely all the way there to submitting. At the state level, we're currently in a transition period, but the states are applying now for something called the FAST program that is across all states, and certain states are awarded, but basically they're resources to help companies and founders with applying for SBIR STTR grants. And often those states can actually give out money called Phase 0 grants to pay for a grant writer to help you with writing these grants. So we'll see where we get here in the next couple of months, but probably by September, October, most states will know whether they were awarded money for the year or not. So if you Google FAST program, they have a list of that, of the awardees once they award them, and they'll have links to all the different states who runs those programs for each state. So that's a great place for resources. They often will have other things beyond just the Phase 0 grants, but also training workshops about how to start a business, other small business topics, competitions or pitches where you could win some money that might help you generate more preliminary data or hire your first person, or, a certain small amount of money to help you get going a little bit more.
Okay, so and we do have one more question if people want to stay on for just one more minute. And I did drop a link in the chat, and it looks like Riley reposted it to everybody for me. So thank you for NIDA's sample SBIR STTR. I'm pretty sure NIAID has them as well. So one last question. How does NIH ensure your application is reviewed with discretion? Do their reviewers complete NDAs? I know people stealing ideas is always a risk with grant reviews, but SBIRs and grants like this seem to have a business component that make them even more high risk to share your ideas. Great question.
You're correct. Yeah, really, really good question. You're right. This has proprietary information in it when you submit these. You may or may not have filed a patent on it yet. It may be something that is so game-changing, it's amazing, right? I'm going to guess everybody's idea is that way. So yes, the reviewers do have to acknowledge that they are not allowed to disclose any of this information that they reviewed to anyone. They're not allowed to benefit from it. For NSF specifically, we sign I'm an NSF SBIR reviewer. We sign a form about that as we go through the process. So it's very controlled. But given that, it still is an inflection point for founders and startup companies as they write these. How much can they say to get it funded, right? How much do they need to explain and they can disclose versus still trying to hang on to stuff that feels very, makes them feel nervous to disclose. So this is a really tough balance. And a job as a grant writer is to try and lean on the companies to say, if you don't explain this, I can't tell whether you can do this or not. So that is your disadvantage when the reviewers see it. So you're right that this is a tricky spot with working on writing these grants, is deciding how much to disclose. I will say that people typically feel a lot more comfortable about that process when they have a provisional patent, like they've started the road down generating IP. But that being said, some of the products that I read around are like health tech apps, where the software and the coding isn't something that is involved with IP and maybe trademark or something else, but typically that is a little different. So in that scenario, most people just accept that IP, they can't be protected by patents in a sense. So they're there.
Great. Thank you so much. We're over time. Thank you everybody for your questions. Veronika, thank you for all this information. I learned a ton. This is really interesting. And I hope that you'll come back and talk to us. We'll chat offline about doing another one on preliminary data. And I think our next one in 2 weeks is on, I'll be talking about writing team tables for an R01 application. So that's going to be on July 10th. So thank you everybody for attending, and thanks Veronika for sharing your expertise. We hope to have you back. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.